Yeah, thank you everyone for being here today. Leon, please look up. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure. So in the next 15 minutes, I'll quickly be talking about gacha monetization of women's leisure. And basically, it's divided into two parts. What did I do before? This is the only part where I'll really be talking about Genshin Impact, and then I'll be talking about the second part, about the rest of my research. When I started my postdoc in 2021 at the Tampere Game Research Lab, I really wanted to focus on parasocial relationships and game characters. But one thing that happened just before, a couple of months before I started my postdoc, was the release of Genshin Impact. And its characters had gotten so popular on different English-speaking social media. I wasn't really engaged with East Asian social media at the time. Players would constantly stream their gacha pools and then asking the characters to come home. And I was kind of interested in, what does this even mean, right? Why are you streaming this kind of stuff? Now, by doing that, I fell into the Genshin Impact rabbit hole, and I slowly became interested in free-to-play monetization, something which I really was not interested in before 2021. Now, if you look at free-to-play monetization in English-speaking academia, at that time it was mostly focused on American-oriented free-to-play games that would include loot boxes, so in-game random rewards. There were a few exceptions, like Orlando's work, but only a little bit later, I thought, right? So I was more interested in gacha, knowing that this is a random reward mechanic that originates in Japan and then also had spread across the rest of East Asia. So during the first few years, up to 23, I wrote a couple of articles on Genshin Impact. It was really just me raging, being angry about stuff. And I argued that not only are characters used as fuel in game monetization, the characters also have become part of the games as a service model to make sure that players keep playing the game. Now, before this model, fictional characters would usually move between different media, like the media mix, transmedia storytelling, transmedia franchises, to make sure that consumers would consume multiple products. But with Genshin Impact, you could see that these characters were really created to make sure that players would keep returning to the same game, which is what we want, or at least what designers want, if we're designing for a free-to-play game. Now, apparently, this gacha model of pulling characters was apparently significant enough for a website like Sensor Tower that measures digital consumption to report on character collection. They call it character collection. As the top dominant meta feature among top mobile games in 2022, and you could see that it was especially popular among players who spent a lot of time and money, also known as player engagement, in games. So that is what I did. But my research has already shifted again, and I'm not really focusing on Genshin Impact anymore. I'm very sorry to say that at the Genshin Impact conference. But it still has an important influence on my research. I focus now a little bit more clearly on the influence of East Asian pop culture in European consumption habits. Because over the past 30 years, East Asian pop culture has become very important for what is consumed and how it is consumed in Europe and in the US. And I'm situated in Europe, so my focus is a little bit more on that. Now, Genshin Impact then is a game that has solidified, I would say, the presence of East Asian games in Europe and in North America, and has then at the same time also opened pathways to new venues of distributing and consuming gacha games. This is a bit more of a recent report that shows that games that are from East Asia, so we have Lineage M, Honkai Star Rail, Honor of Kings, Pokemon Go, belong to the games on which players spent most money, from 2023 at least. Most of these games are gacha games that feature that so-called character collection, which you can just consider to be gacha. So the consumption of these games has been growing has been growing worldwide. If you, I can't show you that here, but if you just focus on like particular regions, you can tell that it's mostly China and Japan where this is very popular, but at least it's being consumed enough to be considered very like huge globally. You shouldn't, and I shouldn't too, rely too much on these reports in terms of accuracy, because we have no idea where they're pulling their numbers from. But I do think that the presence of these reports show that what is considered worthy to report about in games, and it indicates where governmental, industrial, and audience interest lies. That's at most what I can say about it. Europe's interest lies in what is considered to be safe and healthy gameplay, which is promoted by both the industry and the government, because European governments and several other governments, but again focusing on Europe here, are increasingly worried about the increase in gamified consumption in games. Basically, they're worried about games that contain elements that are gambling-like. And I don't really think I have to tell this audience that gacha games are gambling-like. So these initiatives are focused mostly on children and on parents, but I think that they should include orientation towards at least women's leisure as well. And that is what part of this presentation will be about. I have no idea how far I am at, but yeah, I still have time. All right, so my interest has also shifted more explicitly towards gaming formats that are specifically designed for adult women consumers. I always add a caveat that when I say adult women consumers, I do not necessarily mean that they're only like designed for women or only consumed by women, but that they're kind of like targeted towards this group. I've also become more interested in the physical aspects of gacha and how it's distributed and reimagined globally. Free-to-play games have brought women into gamified consumption as a pastime, and that of course then also applies to gacha games. Now, to my understanding, Genshin Impact was popular among women when there was a rise in the distribution of male characters, but that kind of has declined according to my knowledge and also from what I can tell from the people here. Now, at the same time, women audiences seem to have shifted to otome games, which have gained more global prominence after a huge decline in the past 15 years. It's really striking to me, because I still remember the time that I was playing like the traditional otome game, and people told me like otome games are dead, right? Like we don't play them anymore, and now they're on the rise again. So one of the things that I'm interested in when it comes to women's leisure or women's digital leisure then is otome games. Very quickly, an otome game, right, typically has a female player that forms a relationship with mostly straight male characters, imitates story plots and art styles from other media and genres. It has different story routes. It's text-based. It's generally simple gameplay. In order to forward the story, most of the time you only have to press one button. And it's usually part of a multimedia scape or a media mix. That is what we would consider a traditional otome game. Now, with the global monetization shift from premium games to free-to-play games, otome games also became free-to-play. Maybe now you think, well, naturally they're free-to-play. They didn't used to be free-to-play. Now, players would initially play for character routes in the initial type of free-to-play otome game. You would select a certain character, you would pay for it, and then you would just follow the story of that character. That already differs from the traditional otome games where you have the entire game with all the routes. Now you just had a character route. Now, this free-to-play model emerged around 2013 and was built around encouraging microtransactions in otome games. So we had limited stories per day that were capped with chapter tickets that you could pay for if you wanted to have more chapters, dress-up mini-games, temporary events, and character gacha. And most of all, otome games often contain steamy, intimate sexual content, which became premium. If you want to see that content, you have to pay for that content. That is the research up to this point. Now, we're seeing a new shift in otome games, which I think is mostly visible in Love and Deep Space. Quickly, just focusing on the gacha here. Unlike previous otome game free-to-play models, where you had to pay for the character route or capped chapter tickets or steamy content being premium, This game's main story is completely free to play. However, the entire romance between the characters and the main character is locked behind the gacha monetization. So basically, the main story doesn't show the relationship development between the female protagonist and the male companion characters, so players have to go look for it in the gacha mechanic and the limited events. Which means that the most important aspect of an atomic game, which is the romantic content, is behind a gamified lock. But I think we're missing something vital if we're only going to focus on the gacha aspect of this game. I've been writing an article on Love and Deep Space, which I hope will come out this year. And as I was writing it, I was thinking, I'm not so much interested in the gacha. I'm actually more interested in the features that collect players' personal data. There are features called Remind Me and Quality Time, which are basically reminder and tracker apps that are mediated through the love interest here. You can track your work, you can track your study time, you can track your sleep time. There's also a digital notebook that contains a period tracker, with the love interest then reminding you about your upcoming period. There's an artificial reality function that shows your face in the game, and you enter this data yourself. Now, Europe has the GDPR, which colloquially we call the privacy law, and there's Article 9 that defines how personal data is allowed to be collected and processed in Europe. Note that it is illegal to collect personal data with just a few exceptions, and the major one is being explicit consent. Now, Love and Deep Space has a legal notice with a privacy policy that you have to agree to, because otherwise you cannot play the game. I've tried not agreeing to this privacy policy, and I was immediately locked out of the game. Now, it states that, well, you can still use the game if you don't enter any of the data that I just mentioned, right, like your period, very intimate data. You have to enter the data in order to use the features. Is this explicit consent? I've been thinking about, what does this even mean? And I'm not a lawyer. But I think that even if Love and Deep Space, or this particular game, complies with the European laws, I think there is a gray zone here. I really wonder if this is compliance. But even if it is, does that still mean that it's ethical? Isn't this privacy infringement? My issue with this is not that much that it collects personal data. Well, that is part of the issue. The issue is that it creates an incredibly complete profile of the user that enables user exploitation. This game knows your gambling and spending habits. This game knows your screen time. This game knows your biometric and intimate health. This data is usually dispersed across different apps, right? Usually you have a period tracker app if you have a period. Games generally do not track your period, as far as I know, games that I play. But this game collects it all together. So what is going to happen to that data, right? The company mentions that it will not process this data, not send it to their servers, but how do we really know this, right? Are we sure that they follow through on their promise? And so the game also collects this data on the denominators of play, game, intimate relationships, parasocial intimacy. Are we now normalizing that play, games, intimate relationships, specifically those aimed at cisgender women, cannot happen without users foregoing their privacy? So we're at the final slide already, and I have 1 minute. Great. Love and Deep Space isn't showing an irregularity here. It is very much following the platform logic. This is all part of a wider problem of how platforms operate, how they're more gamified, how users are constantly being tracked. What keeps me wondering really is, what are the alternatives? Right? What can we do about this constant tracking and taking your personal data for gameplay? Is there something we can do about it as researchers? Already before me, scholars have been asking these questions, and even have given some answers at least. For example, Whitson and French here already mentioned in 21 that they want more responsibilized production, which demands corporate accountability and transparency. And some people might just say, well, just don't use the app, don't play the game. But I think that it's very much overlooking the larger issue. In a market saturated with apps and games that leverage users' data, the only option for users to avoid being exploited would be not to play. But women's gaming is already so marginalized in gaming cultures. So if we say just don't play the game, aren't we just making that problem then worse as well? So I have no answers, for now at least. I only have critical questions, and I'm sure you have even more of those questions or takes or opinions. But in any case, thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Joleen. And I do have questions, but I'll pass the mic to other people first. Go ahead. We have around 4 minutes for questions.
Hi, thank you so much for this great presentation. And I want to touch on a point that you mentioned last, which is that women's games are already so marginalized. And I think a lot of the appeal for Love and Deep Space comes from the fact that a lot of women feel seen, whatever that means, right? I'm like, oh, there's a period tracker in the intimacy game that I'm playing, and I've never had a period tracker in a game before. That's why it's made for women. So, and this is a language that I find really interesting that Infold, the studio, also leverages. They try to make it it's a game for women, and that's why we're special. So I was wondering how much of this, for you in your research and from where you go from now on with your research, how would you criticize, or how is your position towards how Infold is leveraging this marginalized position of women's games when they can use the fact that women's games are just usually not like this to collect all of this data?
That's a very difficult question, but thank you. So women's games has a larger history, right? This is not the first women's game that we've seen. It's been going on for 30 years, where games for women have been specifically designed. This is, I think, one of the games where we clearly see that they also try to be something more than a game, where they try to be something that engages with women's lifestyles in a way, or maybe with their biometric health in a way. And in that sense, it doesn't really try to be a game so much as that it tries to be a lifestyle software or lifestyle app, and then in that sense it very much connects to what we already know. Lifestyle software for women has already been around on the Nintendo DS 10, 15 years ago. I'm not entirely sure if I'm answering your question here. I'm also not super interested in only criticizing Infold here or criticizing paper games here, because for me, Love and Deep Space represents a bigger, wider issue. So if I want to criticize Love and Deep Space, which I think is a very good illustrative case study for what is going on, it is it's partially gendered, it's partially women's gaming, it's partially platform logic that I'm critiquing and challenging here. It's just that this particular one is focused on women. I'm not very keen either of saying, well, women don't know how to deal with software because, what do we do? We very much know what it's about, so very difficult to answer, but I hope this gave you some idea.
That's perfectly fine, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We have time for one more. I see Tierney first.
Great presentation. I really enjoyed this talk. I guess my problem is that for otome games, the original Japanese otome games are more like visual novel, that kind of stuff. I wonder how do you feel the introduction of the combat system in Love and Deep Space? Does that still make the game a sort of an otome game, or what does that even mean?
I Good question. What does it even mean, right? If we say otome games, the traditional ones are the visual novels, right? Just a point and click, and now we're not really seeing that anymore. I think this is because this is an outlier. It is interesting that it shows that it's diverging from the original or traditional otome games. I think what is going to happen, this shows that shift, right? This shows that we're more talking about lifestyle merging with this idea of a romance game. Because maybe that is what this currently is, that we're talking about otome games nowadays in terms of, well, this is just a romance game targeted at women mostly. But now there is the lifestyle aspect to it, and we're merging that. So I think this is why I would really call this a shift here, that we're seeing this kind of change. It really tries to be something bigger than just an otome game. And we could even compare it to other types of games, right? Or where you could even wonder, is that still a great game? So Fortnite, Roblox, is that a game, or is it games in a game? Genshin Impact now too, right? Allows you to make a game. So games tend to nowadays try to be bigger than just one type of gameplay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for your answers and for the lovely questions. Round of applause for Joleen BLOM again.